Dogs. So in this DIY, we're looking at why do seasons change? So by now you should know that the seasons change because of the Earth's tilt and the Earth's revolution around the sun. Without it moving around the sun and without that tilt, we would not have seasonal changes. So when the hemisphere is tilted towards the sun, it experiences summer because the sun's rays strike the Earth more directly. So if you look at this diagram right here, and we tried to draw an imaginary line down the middle from top to bottom, where we could see the half of the Earth that is receiving the daylight and the half of the Earth that is in the shadows, then you can look at this kind of like a pie chart, where more of the northern hemisphere is in that sunshine and less of the southern hemisphere would be in that sunshine. So because the majority of the northern hemisphere is facing the sun during the summer, that means that, number one, we get more direct and intense sunlight, so that's going to give us more heat, but also the days are going to be longer. So in summer, when it doesn't get dark until 9 o'clock at night, and it's really, really hot during the day, that's the reason why, because we spend more time in the sunlight and we get that more intense direct sunlight from, or heat from the sun. In the southern hemisphere, very little of it is in that sun's coverage during the day. So the days are really short. That's what we're experiencing when it gets dark at 5:30 at night. And it's really cold because we're not getting that intense light. We're getting less direct sunlight. And so with DIY4, you should have understood by now that the seasons in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere are the opposite. Now, when neither hemisphere is tilted toward or away, this is when we experience fall or spring. We're transitioning between summer and winter or winter and summer. This is because the sun's rays strike the Earth equally in both hemispheres. So if I were to draw a line, if the sun is on the far side of the Earth in this picture, and I drew a line all around the Earth to show that difference between day and night, it would pass directly through the North Pole and the South Pole. So exactly half of the Earth is in the sunlight and half of the Earth is in darkness. This is where we're going to have about 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night. So neither hemisphere is tilted towards or away from the sun, so neither one is getting more intense sunlight or longer sunlight hours than the other. So when we look at your diagram, let's check to see how well you did here. So when you're looking at a diagram, you need to, number one, identify where your sun is, and then pick one of the locations to the side. And you need to pay attention to which direction the axis is pointing. So here, the North Pole for the northern hemisphere is tilted closer to the sun, and the South Pole is tilted further away from the sun. So in the northern hemisphere, the season is going to be summer. And because you now know that you have opposite seasons in the different hemispheres, if it's summer in the northern hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere, it's going to be winter. Okay? If we look at this one on the opposite side, we see that the North Pole is tilted, it's pointed away from the sun, and now the South Pole is tilted towards the sun. So if the South Pole is tilted towards the sun, that means it's getting longer daylight hours and more intense sunlight. So in the southern hemisphere, it's having summer, and in the northern hemisphere, because we're getting less intense sunlight and shorter daylight hours, it is winter. Okay, now we need to fill in these other two in the transition between summer and winter. And because neither hemisphere is tilted toward or away from the sun, we have to know what season came right before it or what season is coming right after it. So we have these arrows here, and in the northern hemisphere, if it's winter over here, what would be the next season to come after winter? It is spring. So in this position up here, it would be spring in the northern hemisphere, and in the southern hemisphere, because it was summer over here and we transition, the season that comes after summer would be fall. Okay? And then just like the same thing on this side, if it was summer over here, the season after summer for the northern hemisphere would be fall. So we'd have fall down here in the northern hemisphere. And then if it was winter over here, the next season would be spring. So it'd be spring in the southern hemisphere. So check your diagram, check your work from yesterday, make sure that you have everything labeled correctly, and then you can move on to the Kahoot and do some more practice and test your knowledge.